Hello everyone, this is David, Fairly Secret Music. I haven't seen you guys in quite a long time. I know it's been a few months. My beard might have even been black. I don't even remember when the last video I did, but where I've actually seen you guys. But um, we are here to talk about bands that have changed. Changed and then gone back to the way they originally went, and then also changed and never gone back to the way they originally sounded. Um, so it's quite a bit of European metal and bands you've probably heard of, bands that some of you may not have heard of, but definitely should check out. This is again one of those times where I wish I could give a nice soundtrack to this, but I'm not going to go through all this and get it pulled down for copyright strikes or whatever, things like that. So, um, uh, again, as always, messing with my beard. So first band we were gonna talk about is Ulver. So Ulver started out as quite a traditional black metal band from Norway. Um, Christopher Riggs, also known as Garm, was in this band from the beginning. And this is the band that he's always stayed in. There's going to be a couple other bands I talk about that he was in for brief periods of time, and then was actually his spot as vocalist was taken over by another guy who goes by the name of ICS Vortex. His also real name is Simon or Seaman or something. I don't know. Seaman. But we have Ulver, who I love the fact that these first three albums are all going to be by essentially the same artist doing the covers. And so they started out. Sorry, I need a place to put this stuff once I'm done going through them. And I'm recovering from a back surgery, so I don't have a lot of motion going on here. If this is a little bit dark, I was going to do this, but it tended to be a bit too bright, having a light right above me. So I've got like three other lights in the background, and I figured, I can have that kind of, I don't know what kind of complexion that is. So this has a lot of the traditional, like, Norwegian black metal kind of feel to it. A lot of quick blast beats, kind of like that tremolo picking, with a lot of screechy high vocals. Garm did that, but he also layered a lot of clean vocals. So this is kind of very experimental in the way that nobody really had uh, any of the clean vocals coming into any black metal at this point. So this one, uh, if you listen to it, you're going to hear it right off the bat. We're going to hear my dog walking around up top, I think. But, this is a really great starting point to see if you get into Ulver. If you're into black metal, you'll definitely want to check this out. Then they go to their second album. So this one was called Bergtot, and this one is called Fledsinger. I can't see, this lighting is horrible for reading things. This is all just folk music, acoustic guitars, just very folky. I like a complete. Well, not really complete different, because on their first one, which I don't know if you can see that, their first one, there are a lot of elements of acoustic passages, and By this album, they do. I don't think there's any electric guitars or drums on anywhere on this. The very last track, I know it does have drums, but I can't remember any drums on that. But then they switch gears again and put out Nathan's Madrigal, which is possibly one of the noisiest trebly buzz black metal albums ever. It's just kind of crazy. It's hard to listen to sometimes. I don't listen to it a lot. I really like their first album. I like their second album quite a bit. And then later albums. But this is like a complete 180 of the album right before it, that acoustic album. They, at one point, kind of, I don't know if they said it, but people in the scene at one point said that it was recorded in a cabin in the woods on like a 4-track or something like that. And honestly, it does sound kind of like that. Then they did William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So they did songs based on every plate from that. This is where they really kind of start finding exactly what they're going to turn into for the rest of their career almost. Garm is singing clean vocals and just has that kind of intense baritone that he then is known for. Because before this, let me see if I can reach around and grab it. He had done stuff with a band called Arcturus. This is really too big to show you right now, but they did an album called La Masquerade Infernale. And let me see if I can find a picture of the album cover. I don't know if they did show the album cover in here. Well, there we go. So that's the album cover. I would say that this band, Arcturus, also makes quite a lot of changes, but honestly, they've always been a little bit different, and they didn't really change all that much from their first album. Well, from their first album, it did have that traditional black metal kind of thing, but they also had a lot of the clean vocals in there. But from Infernal, basically throughout the rest of their career, they really didn't change a lot. They did change, but they didn't change. They experimented with sounds and kind of structures and stuff like that. But they always kind of sounded like the black metal version of like progressive circus music almost. I don't know. I dare you to come up with a better description of what that sounds like. And then you go on, there's a lot of stuff in between here, so I'm just kind of going faster with these. This is kind of more also when they start really kind of keeping up that more kind of electronic, experimental, avant-garde stuff. Not in like a crazy atonal like way for avant-garde, but just in kind of a just experimental with electronics, kind of new wave sounds. And this is their newest one, and this is all over still. And this is where you get almost more of a new wave feel than previous albums. So they did a lot of things that seemed like score music, or things that were score music. So that is our first band over. And then we go on to another band that Garm sang in, and another band that ICS Vortex took over. So he took over for him in Arcturus. He also took over for him in Borknagar. Garm has always been in Ulver. So Ulver's kind of his baby, so to speak. I don't know if did this that kind of get not 100% sure. Kind of looked like it tipped for some reason. But okay, so now we have Borknagar, which kind of follows suit for that first Ulver album. And again, he's using some clean vocals in there, but a lot of very traditional black metal styles, like a lot of tremolo picking, a lot of blast beats and stuff like that. You get Ivar from Enslaved on keyboards on this one and their second one. And then you also get, I can't remember exactly who, Garm, Infernus, Ivar, Grim. So these were like members of a lot of other bands. So this kind of became like a weird super group. So the first self-titled one, and I've looked up Borknagar as a word and found that it's just kind of like a made-up word almost. Ulver means wolves in Norwegian. This is the last one with Garm on it, and this has a lot more clean vocals, a little bit more experimental with the way they sounded on their first album. And then you get Archaic Chorus, which is the first one with Vortex on it. He does the kind of grim vocals and the clean vocals. They get a little bit more on that kind of, I want to say, kind of progressive side of metal, kind of starting with this one. They have a few other albums in between, but then they do an acoustic album called Origin. And so this has nothing but clean vocals. But I think this was kind of like a big turning point for the band, just kind of to cement their, or kind of push away from the black metal kind of beginnings, I would say, and then going into what they would become. Because then Simon leaves for a while, and they get a guy named Wintersorg, and he does both the grim and they write that. Normally I'd call it like harsh vocals or whatever. They call them grim vocals, grim and clean vocals. But they get more polished, and they never really had that true raw. Well, the first two albums are a little more raw, but they always had pretty decent production. These weren't anything like, like early Darkthrone or that one Ulver album. So you get Wintersorg on this. He also, let's see, he is on this album also with Simon, because he takes over on bass, because Simon also plays bass. And then I don't think Simon left after that, because Simon was in Borknagar, Arcturus, Arcturus, Dimmu Borgir for a while. He also did his own solo album, which I don't have, but I do want. I think that's just called Vortex or ICS Vortex or something like that. So then they started doing harmonies, clean vocals. This album is the one sole Borknagar album that has Bard Kolstad, I think his name is. Let me double check. Yep, Bard Kolstad. And if you do not know who that is, he is the drummer for a band called Leprous, and he is amazing. And the one cool thing about this album, there's two really cool things about this album, is when they kind of slow things down, where Bard is not playing like just 16th note double basses. You get to hear how good this drummer is. He is allowed to do just about anything he wants in Leprous, but in a band like Borknagar, I'm glad that they got him at this time in their career, so you could get a drummer who has such good ideas, some really awesome grooves, just to be able to settle down, not doing double bass, but doing some cool, interesting things. This is actually, out of all my research, and this video I'm trying to do faster than, you know, I want it to be less than an hour, but I'm not sure. But the thing is, when I was researching all this and just getting sure with what I was going to say about these, and of course this is my first video for a while, and so just I'm kind of a jumble of words. This was the album that I thought, I gotta go to bed with that one, because this not only has Vintersorg Vortex on it, and Bard Kolstad, it also has Garm come back and do a song called Winter Thrice, where it has all three singers doing parts of the vocals. They all like take certain sections. And it is just amazing. So if you are curious about Borknagar, check out this title track on this album, Winter Thrice. And the very last thing, the album that actually got me to get into them again, is True North, which is the album that they came out with right before COVID hit. And they were going to do this Devastation Nation tour in 2000. They canceled that in March or April or something like that. No, I think it was May. And I never got refunded for the ticket because they said it was going to get rescheduled for February of the next year. February of the next year, 2021, still everything was impossible. And so they canceled it. Apparently I got refunded at some point. But when I was going to go get tickets the day of the show, a friend of mine said, hey, my buddy has a ticket for Borknagar. He can't go. Do you want to go? So I ended up using that ticket. It was a great show. I probably will never see these guys again. So I was really happy that I was able to see them. So from their first album, let's talk about Ulver for a second. From their first album, or even their third album, to, say, their newest album, if you listen to their third album to their newest album, you'll be like, this is not even the same band. Borknagar, almost you could say, yes, I can hear the similarities, but this is super polished compared. Next band on the list. And so these are bands that changed kind of more throughout their career. Then we're going to get to some bands that kind of did complete 180s for the rest of their career from where they started even. Next band is Enslaved. Now, they started out as very traditional. Well, one could say they were kind of traditional black metal, but they always had kind of like that Viking element to them, that kind of, I don't know, just Viking element, you know, the kind of chanty type of. Just listen to them, for Christ's sake. Anyway, so this is pretty raw. Then they did 2 albums. They did Frost, they did Eld. Those albums are pretty much kind of like 2 sides of the same coin. Could not talk about them without talking about Bloodheim, because this was kind of like the big one that everybody was talking about. In what year was this? I want to say it was around, I don't even know, 90, late 90s, I know that. Then this had a guy named Roy on guitar, whose last album with them was, well, there was another album between this and this one, and this is the album where they really kind of start moving into a very progressive kind of sound, using mellotrons, having clean vocals start to appear. The one thing with Enslaved that I kind of get tired of is the harsh vocals, because there's not a lot of variation with them. They're always kind of the same, you know. It always just kind of sounds like the same vocal part over and over again, which can get tiring. Below the Lights is probably, you know, it is my favorite of all of their albums. This is one where they really went progressive. You just listen to the song Queen of Night. It's got flute in it. There's a spot in the middle, kind of like bridge section, where I have trouble counting it. There's one spot where I'm just like, wait, what is the time signature in this section? Dirge Rip, I think his name was the drummer. The downside of this album is the bass drums, or the drums in general, are kind of muddy. I wish there was way more clarity, like the clarity of Bloodheim or Monumenson. Is that Monumenson? Yeah. Which I didn't tell you before. But this is really kind of where they started changing quite a bit. Then by this album, this is where everything kind of gets really polished. Honestly, I wish the drum sound of this album was on Below the Lights, because Kato always had a fantastic drum sound right from the beginning. This has the song Isa on it. Also, there's a song called Lunar Force, Surrounded by Allegiance. Is that Surrounded? Yeah. And then Return to the Azrael. I am sorry. In here, without this light on, I cannot read anything, because, as you can see, the text is a light gray against black. So thank you for that, guys. But Lunar Force is a good indication. This one, Rune. Okay, I'm going to look at the Entroper, Path to Veneer, and the song Rune. The song Rune actually sounds kind of like Tool a bit. It has that very staccato kind of measures of 7/8 in there. They're using a lot of clean vocals by this time. There was a lot of clean vocals on Isa, but Rune really kind of starts doing a lot more of the clean vocals. They had a keyboardist at that time that did all of them. I believe Gruttle, the bass player, also did some of those, but he's usually doing all the more harsh vocals. And the reason I kind of stop here is because there's not really much I can say about albums going forward. They're all kind of very reminiscent of these last two, without kind of even moving the band forward. It's not that they're boring, but it's kind of like they got kind of stuck in that AC/DC rut where you know exactly what the next Enslaved album is going to sound like. So I decided not to even continue after that. So that is all the black metal bands that I was going to go through. The next band is a band that started off very gothy, hence the name Gothic. I'm not sure if you can see that, but Paradise Lost. Oh, great! I'm gonna have the AC kicking on. Started off with very death metal-y vocals, and so this band is technically one that starts a certain way, kind of does a little experiment in the middle of their career, and then kind of goes back to the way they began. Excuse me. I think it's like 2:33 in the morning. But this is more of their raw kind of death doom. And then Shades of God. I remember seeing this, being a huge Sandman fan, huge fan of Dave McKean, and thinking, well, I kind of got to get that because I need to know what that actually sounds like. So Shades of God, he's still doing the kind of guttural, not guttural really, but kind of harsher vocals. But you could still always tell exactly what he was saying when, especially with lyrics, you could make it out. By the time they got to Icon is where he started doing a little less of the kind of harsh vocals and a bit more of the what he was accused of is kind of sounding like James Hetfield. So they weren't really changing styles all that much in these first three albums, but vocally he was changing things up quite a bit. By the time they got to Draconian Times, he really was sounding a lot like James Hetfield. And they had the same lineup for those first three albums. Only the drummer left, and a guy named, I think it was Lee Morris. He joined, and he probably thought, oh, cool, I'm in this kind of doomy metal band and stuff like that. But what they did is kind of did a 180, added a lot of more electronics and stuff to their sound, and he started singing just clean stuff, being more kind of like, I don't know what kind of new wave or like synth pop vocalist I could really compare him to, but he did a little bit more spoken stuff. Then after this, they did an album called, I believe, Host, and then something with butterflies or something. All these bands always have to do butterflies. Um, but they eventually, and there's a few albums that were more in line with what their original stuff sounded like, and then they went back to really their doom sound on Within the Plague Within. There were a couple albums before that that still had this kind of sound, where he was doing more of the kind of death metal vocals. But this was the one that really caught my ear because of the song Beneath Broken Earth. They had Adrian Erdlinson from At the Gates and The Haunted on this one. And it was just interesting hearing him play such slow stuff, because he's usually really a faster player. But he's doing, vocally, he's doing the deathy kind of vocals, but his clean vocals are probably at their best on this one and the following ones. I know for sure on this because of the songs that I listened to and refreshed on this. I remember Medusa being another one that I really enjoyed when I got it. I don't listen to Paradise Lost a ton. And then here's their newest studio album, because this one right here was made during COVID, and this is a live double album. Or is it live double? Is it a CD and a DVD? Yeah. So the CD and DVD, and they do things from throughout their whole career on here. And the one thing that I didn't ever know before, because I really didn't take the time to check, is it's been the same singer, bass player, two guitarists throughout this whole career. I thought the singer and the one guitarist were the only two. The singer and the one guitarist, who's kind of like the main songwriter through the band, those two have a new project that is very much in that 1 second vein, but even more so towards the kind of synth pop thing. I can't remember what they're called though, so hopefully you can look that up on your own. So before I do that, I'm gonna do this band, who I have out of order here, is Moonspell. This actually came out quite a bit after. Sorry, I'm just checking the time here. Came in quite a bit after the rest of this stuff, but this really shows a good indication of where they started. He does a lot of that really very kind of harsh vocals, and everything is about wolves and Satan and goats and shit like that. And then they did an album called Wolfheart, which had like Alma Mater and Wolfshade and Vampira, very much in the kind of goth metal vein, but leaning more towards the metal. And when he would sing clean, he always had a really, really low voice, and he still does. But it always got that kind of Dracula kind of feel to it, which was appealing. I mean, there was nobody else in the early mid 90s that sounded like Moonspell. And so then these guys are from Portugal. I don't know any other band from Portugal except for maybe, no, I think they're from Israel, or Feigned Land, or Orphaned Land. And then they did Irreligious, which had songs like Opium, Awake, and Mephisto. Those were some highlights on that. Um, this was more of the same but more in line with more of the goth kind of feel. And this is kind of where I jumped on when I first started listening to them, went back to Wolfheart. Um, and then after that, the best album, in my opinion, that they ever did was Sin Pecado. Um, this just has so many great songs on it, like Handmade God, what are they called? Abysmo, Magdalene, Mute, Decadence. You know, this was really where they were really going away um, from the metal so much. They had a new bass player who I think was just in the band for studio playing. Um, but a lot of really great bass playing on this. Vocally, it's probably my favorite uh, thing that he ever did. Um, there's something about his harsh vocals that I don't 100% embrace, but I like them enough to get into them. And he does a lot of the clean variation vocals where that always appeals to me too. So, but this, they did a lot of just experimenting. And I always thought that this was the album that they did, like, hey, we did this one album, but our fans really didn't like it, and we jumped back into um, our original style. But it's not really true, because they did Butterfly Effect, um, and that is kind of extending the Sin album, but not in as such a clean or melodic way. Then they did Darkness and Hope, which started bringing back in the stuff from their original sound, like from the Irreligious and Wolfheart kind of vein. The Antidote. So I always thought these two, or no, Butterfly Effect and Antidote, and this one, because I didn't realize that it popped in the middle between them, um, were more of the kind of I thought they were more industrial or kind of goth, more true goth sounding, but they end up just kind of starting to pull back in more metal kind of sounds and stuff like that until they get, I think there's a bunch between. Sorry, I didn't grab everything. And later on, these last two albums are kind of like highlights of things that kind of pulled me back to Moonspell. This one has Annika from The Gathering. That's another band that changed quite a bit from their first album to their third album, I would say. And then when they got Annika, they really changed throughout. They kind of went further and further away from metal. But she's on here. And what song is that? Skullflower, I think. Scorpion Flower. But he is doing the more harsh vocals on this album, but using a lot of the clean vocals also, which he uses really well. And his vocals kind of sound like my friend Brian's harsh vocals. So I think that's another thing that kind of makes me okay with them, even though they're not entirely with, what the type of death metal or whatever kind of vocals that I normally like. Uh, just kind of like, oh, that's, it kind of sounds like Brian and stuff like that. This is one that, and then they have a few more kind of between here and then after. But this is one that I wish I had the 2-disc version, because there's Alpha, God, what is it called? Alpha Noir and Omega White, I think. So I have no idea what those Omega White songs sound like. But there's one after this where they had a video with a bunch of girls in it that I think his voice sounds fantastic. But from their first album, with a lot of the very harsh vocals, to, irreligious, to Sin, and then back into kind of where they started. So those were a lot of the bands that really went around and oh no, I have one more. No, I have 3 more technically, but so My Dying Bride started out very doom death, and As the Flower Withers, there's not one clean vocal on any of that. Again, another Dave McKean cover, so I was kind of excited about that. I think he also did covers for them, or somebody who did very similar cover artwork for the 3 EPs that are the Trinity CD here. And this is all very much similar, dream death or doom death kind of stuff. Around this time, he starts adding in clean vocals. And when My Dying Bride, Turn Loose the Swan came out, I didn't even know about them. I started knowing about them after this album, and I remember still needing this album and winning it on a bet, because my friend Corey said that Courtney Cox was not in the Masters of the Universe movie, and she was. And I still have that disc that he purchased for me. I ended up getting this special version with commentary by the singer and the guitarist. But this, he starts using a lot of clean vocals. They did, the very first song is just vocals and violin. By this time, with Angel in the Dark River, he's only using clean vocals, and their violinist Martin was kind of like the special ingredient to this band. He always gave them something different to, set them away from, like, say, Paradise Lost or Anathema, who we're going to talk about. But after this album, they did, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Oh, yeah, you are. Like Gods of the Sun. This is probably their most polished album up to this point. And very more straightforward kind of metal, no death vocals at all clean vocals, but the violin is still very prominent. And then they do an album called 34.788% Complete, and all of their fans went, what the fuck? And I think what they started feeling was the pressures of fans talking about how they didn't like this. I don't know. I always thought it was pretty darn good. Um, it was different. I know they had problems with their drummer and their one guitarist really not getting along with that drummer. Um, their one guitarist, Andrew, who's basically been in the band since the beginning. Uh, Calvin, the other guitarist, he ended up writing quite a bit of this album. And I don't know if it was a matter of them just not knowing what to do after the last two albums and him just kind of taking the reins. But this doesn't stand out quite as much as I remember it when they came out with it. It's surely it's different. I wouldn't say it's a complete 180. I would say it's maybe like a good, 45 degrees difference, but um I still really like it. But what they ended up doing is saying, okay, well, our fans really didn't dig on this album, so let's give them exactly what they want. And they did Light at the End of the World. So this is the one band where they really did one album that was completely a experiment, totally outside of their. It was like their Cold Lake, for Christ's sakes. I still think Cold Lake is the best Celtic Frost album, and anyway, I don't like that band. It was their load. It was their Cold Lake. It was their. I don't know. I can't give you any more examples. But he goes back to doing the death vocals. He does a lot of clean vocals still, but now it's like a 50-50 thing. They did so many albums. There's so many albums since this album. I want to say at least like 8, maybe only 6 or 7. I'm not 100% sure. I have them all, but I figured I wanted to keep this at least under an hour if I can. So, but of their later albums, they have this album, Line of Deathless Kings, which they have the drummer from the band called I can't remember. His name was John, and he was fantastic. And I really wish he would have stuck with the band because Sean Steels didn't come back after like an ankle injury or something like that, and they've always had kind of mediocre substitutes except for the guy on here. And on the very first track on here, Aaron also does a vocal harmony around the end of the song, the first song, that is just fantastic. So those are all bands that either started in one spot and really went away. Some of those bands kind of circle around back to their beginnings. One band that really never circled back is Anathema. They started out as a very heavy doom deathy type band with these two albums. This one has Pentecost 3 and the Crestfallen EP on it, and this one is Serenades. And this was with a band singer named Darren. What's Darren's name? Let's see. Some of these they don't like to even. Yeah, I didn't think they liked to tell me who sang on them. But when Darren left to join, God, what were they called? Blood something, with members of Cradle of Filth that had left. God, what was his name? Darren White. That was his name. Then Vincent Cavan took over on vocals. They did an album called The Silent Enigma. And at first, his vocals weren't so good either. Because Darren White wasn't the best vocalist, but they really fit. He did this weird spoken wordy type thing. When I found out about this band, they had just released Eternity. I think Eternity, Dusk in Her Embrace, and Like Gods of the Sun all came out within the same 6 months of each other, or maybe even same month. I'm not even sure. And his vocals on this started getting better. Luckily, I heard this first because I was like, oh, yeah, they kind of have a Pink Floyd-y kind of sound to them a little bit. Then John Douglas left, and they got this guy named Sean Steels who ended up playing one album with them, and then going off to join My Dying Bride. But this is my favorite Anathema album of all of them, because this one just has really good songs on it. It's very experimental. It's very moody. But they moved on. They got John Douglas back, and they did Judgment. This has my favorite song on it. It's called One Last Goodbye. It is about their mother passing away. Sorry, this is the most uncomfortable chair. But, you know, after this album, they just kind of got less, and at this point they're pretty rock bandish. Same thing with this, which was A Fine Day to Exit, which has some of the coolest songs on here. Has an album or a song called Temporary Peace that is one of the most beautiful things, but they made it into like a 12-minute thing with like ocean sounds and stuff, so you could never put it on a mix CD or whatever unless you had an edited version. But they did a bunch of albums from this through to this, which is Weather Systems, and Untouchable 1 and 2 are just fantastic. And from those first doom death albums to this, you would not even think this is the exact same band. And the bass player and one of the guitarists becoming the singer are the only real changes that actually happened. So check out like Anathema, Pentecost, or Crestfallen, and then listen to the first song on Weather Systems. This is a band that, just like Ulver, changed and never looked back. And we are, 52 minutes? Let's see. I can maybe get this whole thing done in less than an hour. This band has a lot of stuff to go through, but I can go through a little bit of it pretty quick. So, the last band that has, I wouldn't say, honestly, I wouldn't say they've completely changed from this album to their newest album, or even their newest last 4 albums, because they always had elements of prog in their sound. So, do you say that they really changed, other than taking out? Honestly, if you just take the vocal element away, they honestly haven't changed all that much, because they always had very, very progressive elements, long songs, lots of changes, use of odd time. Just, at this point, they're pretty death metal-y. On this album, kind of similar to the first album, but a lot kind of cooler sounding. Their bass player is absolutely a monster on the fretless bass. And that was the first thing that kind of pulled me in, is that fretless bass playing on this. I had a hard time getting into Opeth. especially because like These Arms, Your Hearse. Yeah. This is kind of like the closest thing to a black metal album they ever did. Um, there's a lot more death metal vocals on this, less clean vocals that I can remember. Um, their new drummer comes in. I think both guitarists or one of the guitarists did all the bass parts. Because Martin, God, what was his name? Martin something. Let's find out. Maybe I'm not going to be able to keep this under an hour. I know. There was Martin something who went on to be in Soen, and then there was Martin, I believe, Lopez. Is he the bass player? Fuck, I can't remember. He wanted to join, but they decided, no, we're not going to let two guys in, because then it's like a 50-50, two new guys who happen to be friends. But I think he might have played on there if they played any live shows. But by this album, he joins, and so there's the two Martins, Peter and Mikkel. They start doing a lot more like clean acousticy stuff on this album. And you know, they may have done a lot of that on previous albums too. The first three albums I don't listen to a ton, except for Morning Rise, because I like that bass player. And then you get Blackwater Park, which is kind of the big stepping stone for them. They start working with Steven Wilson. They start incorporating synths quite a bit. His clean vocals get even better, probably because of Steven Wilson working with them. And then they do a 2-album set, basically. They should have just released it together. There's Deliverance and Damnation. This one is all pretty heavy, but they still have a lot of clean parts. I think if they were going to do this, this should have had no spots where there were any clean vocals at all. It should have just all been death metal vocals. Just me. I mean, the songs are good too, but and then Damnation, which doesn't have a lick of double bass or real heavy guitars at all. It has some of the tastiest guitar solos. Windowpane has like 2 or 3 solos, and there's one solo that goes on forever, and every note of it is the most tasty solo ever created. So one could say this is really where their turning point was, doing this album, doing a tour where it was all the more mellow stuff for the most part. You could kind of tell he was getting sick of doing the death metal stuff. And he had even said stuff about it. But, you know, they did Ghost Reveries, and this is the last one with Martin Mendez. No. Yeah. Martin Mendez is the bass player. Lopez is the drummer. Let's find out if one of these goddamn things has it. Yeah, it doesn't really even tell me here. Drums. Martin Lopez was the drummer. Martin Mendez is the bass player. So, there's a lot of really awesome stuff on here. Very progressive in spots. Things that wouldn't sound out of place on a Dream Theater album, actually. But they also then do, after Martin leaves, they get Martin Axe. They do Watershed, which is probably my favorite Opeth album. I do have a sweatshirt with that album cover. I remember thinking, I really wish they had a Morning Rise hoodie, but they didn't. And then I started thinking, wait, this is my favorite album, so why would I not want a sweatshirt with this image on the cover, on the back? I mean, at least it wasn't this guy. This was some of the weirdest packaging ever. But I wanted the DVD version with the extra stuff, and I can't remember if this has. I think it just has. Oh no, maybe it is the whole thing in 5.1. It might be. Anyway, this has one of the greatest songs on it of the whole discography of Opeth, and that is Heir Apparent. Not a clean vocal in sight, and honestly, I hope when they auditioned new drummers, they just said, "Here, can you play Heir Apparent or Hair Apparent or whatever, however you want to pronounce it? Here's Heir Apparent. Listen to it, play it. If you can play this, you're in, because that thing is fantastic." And then from that album, they go to Heritage, where there's not any clean vocals whatsoever on this. He fully embraces his 70s prog stuff. There's even a song on here, what is it, Slither, I think, where they totally embrace their inner Deep Purple. And then you have, what is this, Pale something? Pale Communion. Here, I'll just stack these. The Sorceress, and this one with the weird Incarnate. I'm not even going to pronounce it. So these last three have basically been an extension of Heritage, in my opinion. But I like the fact that he hasn't gone back to, doing death metal vocals. And, he basically said, I'm done with those death metal vocals. He does them live. But other than that, they haven't showed up on a studio album. So that's it. That's all I got. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I haven't done one of these in a long time. I don't want to do them this long, though. I think this is basically asking too much of people. But I kept on adding bands, and I kept on adding more albums. So hopefully you enjoy it. If not, I don't care. Have a good one. At least it's not a ranking video. God, I hate those things.